Hello,
Hey.
Mr. Khalil. Hi. Uh, Welcome, everybody. We already have an audience. I'm Kartikey Sehgal, and I'm in conversation with Mr. Khalil Elayan. I hope I've got that right.
That's right.
We'll be speaking on the subject of poetry and perhaps on the subject of Robert Frost, who I know that our dear professor likes, since I went through his Instagram account and saw some of his works, and the fact that he lives in a beautiful farm. So we'll be having a conversation on perhaps ecology, that is the environment, perhaps climate change, and most importantly, his poems. I have his Noontime Caress, that's the poem published on page 223 of the anthology on global warming. I have the book with me. It's a good looking book. Well done, Akshay and Poet's Choice. And from this book, I gather that Mr. Khalil is a senior lecturer of English at, how do I pronounce, Kennesaw, is that right?
Perfect, yeah. It's
Kennesaw State University.
It's in the Atlanta metro area. So.
Okay, that's in Atlanta, okay.
Yeah.
He's teaching mostly world and African American literature.
Correct.
Would you say Chinua, how do I pronounce it? Achebe, is that the correct pronunciation? Things Fall Apart. Is that also an example of African American literature, or am I confusing it with?
That would be in my world literature class because it's from Africa, and so things like Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, those writers are the ones that I would be teaching in African American literature, probably from the slave experience and post-slavery 20th century, like the Harlem Renaissance. So works like that. Yeah.
Lovely. So
literature, for instance, I teach what your great epic from India, the Mahabharata. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So I believe you are teaching verses from Mahabharata, or perhaps a few chapters, because it's a very lengthy book.
I teach the abridged copy. It's about 450 pages. So I know it's several thousand pages long. So yeah.
Yes. Well, that's fairly interesting. I hope we can have a good discussion today, perhaps even on some of these subjects. Is there a noise? Is there a noise affecting you?
Not me.
Okay. Just give me a moment. I believe the air conditioner is malfunctioning. As long as it doesn't drop on me, it's okay. Now, it says here that you love spending time in nature on your farm in North Georgia.
Correct.
How far is your farm that is in North Georgia from where you are living?
I live near the Tennessee border, but I'm on the Georgia side, and I'm about an hour from where I work. But luckily, I only have to teach on 2 days a week, so the drive is not bad. I get to listen to my music and my books on, audiobooks in the car on the way to work. So, but it's about 20 acres, and 17 of which is woods. So I have a lot of animal life, deer, blue heron, turkeys, coyotes, you name it. Even a bear comes every now and then. So
that sounds lovely. I believe the bear is the friendliest of all of them.
Well, I actually got chased by a bear once, so no problem.
Okay, and could you close the door? Akshay, you'll have to. Yeah. So sorry for that.
No, it's
okay. Okay. Now, I'd love to come back to the bear and the poetry. Now, your poems have been published in A Gathering of the Tribes magazine. I believe I found something online on that. Plants and Poetry Journal, About Place Journal, The Aesthetic Apostle, and very recently, your essay appears in Talking Writing. Is your essay in any way related to the farm life or to poetry?
It is related to poetry. It was a creative nonfiction piece that I wrote back in 2019, November, after going to New York. The man who published my first poem ever, his journal, he's the main editor. His journal was the one that you mentioned first, and
a
gathering of tribes, and they had a whole art and literary group, as well as actors in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And he passed away earlier that summer, in July, I believe. And so they had a celebration of life for him in the Lower East Side. And so I flew up there to New York and paid my respects. It was an all-day celebration, and I was fascinated by dancing in the streets and seeing all the artists and the actors celebrating this man who had migrated from New Orleans to New York. And I had corresponded with him on email several times before he passed away. And he was a fascinating, brilliant man. And so I wrote that particular article about it.
Okay. Well, what's his name, if I may know?
I can't remember, honestly.
It happens. It happens. But the reason I asked is just as a way to give him a tribute, because I have done some work among the, I would call them the indigenous population,
right,
or what we refer to as the tribal population,
correct,
in our country. So I happen to meet wonderful people, and I can imagine and connect with the images of dancing and celebrating a man who gives his time and attention to such a cause.
It was an incredible experience, and it was something I couldn't forget. It was just he had gone blind with glaucoma before he passed away for some years, and my own father went blind, and so my dad continued to read via Braille and audiobooks, and so there was this sort of kinship and understanding, and it was incredible. And to hear about his experience it's Steve Cannon. Steve Cannon was his name, and he seemed to inspire so many people, thousands of people, because there were so many there. There was music, there was acting. The police had to shut down the streets for everyone to be able to walk from one block to the next. That's how famous he was in that area.
Well, and you speak very fondly of him, so I'm sure the article also must have inspired many others to look upon his work in a gentle manner and to celebrate it. Well, no wonder, I did wonder why this line appears in the bio, in the book, about your most recent essay. Now I know. And I think it's fair that you give it a mention.
Well, I owe so much to him because I had written so many essays in my life, nonfiction. I mean, being a professor, it's expected. And also I had written mostly fiction as well as nonfiction. And I never felt comfortable writing poetry. I did when I was younger, and it was horrible. And so the older I got, I felt a little bit more, I guess, not just eager, but that I had attained a sense of discipline and righteous inspiration, basically, giving a voice to people who don't have it, frankly, people who are poor, people who have been war-torn, not to mention the environment, which doesn't get enough, I think, representation in poetry until recently, the last, I guess, 5 to 10 years. And so several years ago, I said, well, I'm going to return to poetry. And when he published that first poem of mine, when his journal did, that sort of was the gateway for a new genre for me that I always taught and was inspired by. But yeah, I felt I owed him a great deal. So.
No, you do. You know, the way you speak of him, the way you describe him and his work, it makes me want to know more about him. Right. So this is already a wonderful tribute to him, and I think it's wonderful to take into account and give respect to people who have inspired us. It's just makes the heart lighter and makes it brighter. That's Absolutely. What I feel, and we'll come to your poetry, and I hope you'll read for us Noontime Caress.
Sure.
And I don't know how hot it is in Tunnel Hill, Georgia, but in Mumbai, where I am, you need lots of hydration to survive the noontime.
Yeah,
a caress would be welcome.
Absolutely. It's right now it's rainy and cold, but it was both a fond remembrance of the days in my youth when I could sit outside at noon during summer vacation, versus now if you go outside, in July, it's a sticky heat that does more than caress you; it overwhelms you. You feel like you're drowning. You're drowning in sweat. You're drowning in the sticky heat, and yet the sun is out. Yeah, that's. I got inspired by that. There was a call, I think, for one journal to write a very, very short poem affecting, in which you're affected by climate change. And so I wrote that, but then at the same time, you guys made the call, a submission call, and I sent it to you guys, and you guys accepted it. So I was happy about that.
Oh, we are fortunate because this is already a lovely conversation, and we hope we'll get some questions as well from anybody who's listening in. We have 14 members currently with us, and so we'll go to Noontime Caress,
okay.
And then I'll eventually I'll bring in Mr. Frost, Robert
okay.
Frost, and I'll ask you questions about that.
Sure.
Over to you.
Okay.
For Noontime Caress.
Noontime Caress. It is not a specific view or place, nor a tree or a brook, not even a type of toad or thrush, just a feeling, really, a texture gone wrong. The very atmosphere, as it caresses my arm in summer at noon, when the sun's rays pummel my crown, it is then that I know the sky has fallen heavily on my skin, and the world is terribly different.
Ooh. Wow. When did you write this?
2 years ago.
Okay, and do you remember the aura around you when you were writing this? Was it noontime or was it an evening? And what got you to write it?
My mind had literally thought about the past. I had a specific image in mind. I think one of your questions that you had emailed me about that you might talk about is, where do I write? What environment do I write in? And usually I write in my study, my office at home. And the best time I write is usually from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. I'm not a morning writer.
Okay.
I'm not like Faulkner. I don't have a bottle of Jack Daniels next to me. At 6 a.m. I write in the dark, and I write in my office usually. But so I was thinking about this time when I was a kid, sitting in a lawn chair in the backyard, and how I wish I could do that at any day in the summer, and you just can't anymore. It's so hot, and so the mind is not linear. It doesn't think linearly. We have clocks that create a linear pattern, and we are tied to that. Our gravestones are constant reminders, of the dead, saying you were born on this date, you die on this date. But our brain doesn't work that way. We force it to out of habit. but memory is not linear, and so I'm able to skip around in my brain to and project both the present on the past and the past on the present. That way, I allow a sort of fluid inspiration to hit me, and where I'm not encumbered by linear time anymore. It's as if I create a timeless capsule, and that's the best way I can describe it.
And do you wish that the days where you could sit comfortably under the sun, do you wish for those days? Do you have an attachment?
Yeah, I would love them, but the reality, of course, is that change is change. The world is in a constant state of flux, and humanity has contributed, albeit negatively, to the change. And rather than changing gradually, it's changed abruptly. So, but I can't be too attached to the past, or I'll suffer the fate of many people, which is
of the Greeks.
Yes.
Of the Greek gods.
Yeah.
Yes, who were too attached to their persona and to their habits. They couldn't, and things will end in a tragedy. That's the lesson you get from Greek literature and gods.
That's exactly right. That's something that I'm dealing with every day in class. I teach the Greeks a lot, and they're a big part of, I think, what it means to be human. So.
Yes, that's true. That's true, and so much of, apart from the foundations of democracy, so much of philosophical thought has been derived from the Greek writers.
Right.
Anyway, that will be a lovely discussion. Maybe I can someday attend your class.
Well, well, we were talking about it earlier. There's the universality. They get a lot of credit in the Western world, but in both China and India, they were talking about the same things 100, 200 years earlier.
True.
So Confucius was talking about it. The Tao Te Ching was talking about it. The great Indian epics, the Ramayana, the Bhagavad Gita, which was part of the Mahabharata. So they were all talking about the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. Aryabhat and Bhaskaracharya, absolutely right. Personally, though I find a lot of similarities between Greek philosophy and the philosophy from the Upanishads.
Yes.
That is yes.
I just reread those. I love. It's my favorite.
Oh.
Yeah.
If you could recommend me after the session, which book are you referring to, or which?
The Katha Upanishad is one of my favorites.
Okay. I'll refer my diary, and I have my favorites too. Maybe after this, I can chat with you privately, and we can have a conversation on that. That'll be lovely. I get the image of a chair. Now, from where I am in India, we have what is called a muda. It's in a local tongue. It's a chair that's woven with plastic and sometimes with the brown rope, and so it's an intermingling of the ropes.
Right.
So that creates a tension, and you can sit on the chair. When you think about that era where you would sit under the sun, what age are you at? Are you young? Is it, or were you in America then?
Mm-hmm.
Or were you somewhere else?
I was born in Tennessee. My mother was American, and my father was Palestinian from Jerusalem. And so I grew up in Tennessee, Chattanooga, which is near where I live now, about 25 minutes. But yeah, I was about five or six, and I know exactly the chairs you're talking about. The ones we had here, the frame was made of aluminum, and then you had the plastic fibers that would crisscross, and you would sit in it. It would make a creaking sound. But they weren't the most comfortable chairs, but it was easy to open and fold and close, So.
True, and we have those chairs in our mind. They stay with us no matter where we go. And reading your poem reminded me of that image, the image of sitting outside. And do you like to write? Do you like to express yourself through images like you have in this poem, or are you an emotional person? I'm referring to the modern day poetry where you write about emotions.
I respect that, and I respect it if it's done well. I don't want to sound like discriminatory towards emotions. I have them. But I find that a lot of poetry today is self-congratulatory and ego-driven to the point that your emotions become a preponderant force in your life rather than empathy. And so I read a lot of that, and I was guilty of that when I was younger. I think we all are. You know, the idea that we're the only reality, and my emotions should matter. You know, but then, you know, the more you travel, the more you listen, the more you keep quiet, the more you can hear the rest of the world talking to you and wanting to be heard. And so there's a mutual desire for dialogue. And so my greatest inspiration is to give voice to help others see the tragedies that have befallen humanity and the world universally. And so that discipline, to be able, I think, to hone my inspiration as well as my writing, to basically be a vehicle for others, is what I do and what I like to do.
Well, versus
being overly emotional and expressing that.
Oh, I would
other
love.
People can do it well, you know.
Now, I would love for the modern poets to listen to you and tell us about their feelings, because the modern the school of modern poetry, it relies heavily on the narrative emotion, where you emote your pains, but there's no reflection on them. It's more of an announcement of my inner feeling.
Right.
It's a very big contrast. That kind of poetry, which is raining, which is everywhere, versus what you're referring to as perhaps reflective poetry, perhaps, which requires discipline and understanding. With that in mind, do you have any other poem we can listen to?
Sure. Do you want another one from the book, or you want a different one?
Up to you.
Okay.
Since you mentioned that your poetry connects with or wants to connect with people who are displaced, perhaps, or who are seeing the consequences of climate change. So that's what gave me the idea. Perhaps there's more that we can understand about you through your poems.
Well, let's go ahead and do Empty Harvest, which is in the book as well. That way, it got inspired by, the polar ice caps melting, and so I imagined a child in an Eskimo village.
Okay.
And so he's basically asking questions, and the elders are trying to respond the best way they can without shattering the view that he's going to live. So Empty Harvest. Where are the seals, Mother? Maybe they swim in the deep. Grandfather, there are no salmon. Perhaps where there are bears. I am hungry for what is not here. O shaman of our people, why do you stretch your arms to the sun that melts us? Nephew, the sun is no more at fault than the whale for its own extinction. This world is foreign to me. It coughs and hemorrhages. The state, sharpened by the folly of men, has penetrated its heart. Heated by unnatural fires that cook its organs, the cannibals devour that which gave birth to them. There is no light in these fires. They are all smoke and soot. I taste the ash of the dead and the caribou's liver. Grandmother, where is the solemnity of purpose? Who will plant a new garden in this desert? Only those who carry seeds with holes in their pockets, not needing to mend them.
This is lovely. Some of the lines are very striking. There is no light in these fires. Reminds me of the fires in the Amazon recently.
Yeah.
It turned out they were man-made.
That's right. Yeah.
So
they were. Yeah. it's an easy way to say, oh, look, now we can use this as farmland, and you know,
Yeah.
these large corporations who get the lumber or leftover lumber.
Yeah. And perhaps even in Australia, although my friend tells me some of them were man-made, but others were natural.
Right.
I believe they're called bushfires, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And the lovely line about why do you stretch your arms out to the sun that melts? What was the line?
Yes. He's talking to his uncle, who is basically the shaman of the village, and he says, "Why do you stretch your arms to the sun that melts us?" And of course, the uncle knows that it's not the sun's fault. It's
sun at fault. Okay.
Yeah, the sun is not at fault, nor is the whale for its own extinction. So the life itself, the animal's nature, is not at fault. The humans who artificially alter it are. So.
How much do you feel? I want to ask you about climate change. How much do you feel we are at fault? Do you feel that some part of the climate change is also natural, or are you of the opinion it is 100% natural?
Clearly, climate change is natural. You're dealing with. We've seen the evidence and the effects. You know, we have science and history to show us that it's usually very gradual, unless there is a foreign object hurtling through space, whether it's a meteor, an asteroid, a comet, whatever. That ends up colliding with the planet. But everything else is usually gradual, and it's meant to change. It's meant to be in flux. We know that our sun is going to die in billions of years, right? That this solar system will peter away, but nothing goes to waste in the universe. Everything is recycled. We are the product of a former sun and its system that died or exploded, or, you know, we have stardust from one star in one arm, stardust from another star in another arm, according to Dr. Lawrence Krauss. But the speed at which the change has occurred is clearly over the last century. You know, much has changed since the advancements in nuclear physics, and then, of course, the use of those in the Second World War basically opened a window for self-destruction. Coincidentally, we know that the modern period gave rise to the postmodern period at that time. What does that mean? Well, there's more to it than just a literary or artistic movement. It's the awareness that we can destroy ourselves, and that is more than likely imminent. It's going to happen. We're the most self-destructive species that ever existed. So, because we can consciously, because of our sentience, we can consciously be aware that we are killing ourselves, but we are willfully and consciously complicit in that behavior. It's like, okay, yeah, I know we're doing it, but I would rather accrue this amount of wealth before I die, enjoy it, and die, and leave the legacy of destruction for somebody else to handle. And that's
I wonder if they enjoy it. You know, it's very nihilistic, if one may say so.
That's exactly what
do you believe that greed has overtaken us? Now, I refer to the school of scientists from the 60s and 70s, of which I believe Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud were a part before they parted ways. They said that they implied that we're entering into an era of depression because man must not move away from nature, because nature is a part of him. These are scientists who said that. And furthermore, if you read the texts, you get a sense that maybe we are not ready for the technology. We have the technology, but it doesn't suit us completely. And that is the reason why we are nihilistic and why we ignore life around us.
And I mean, you know, all that has happened in 8,000 years of, you know, relative behavior. So the reality is that the majority of the lifetime of our species, if you look at it, let's say 1.5 to 2 million years in some form, bipedal hominid evolution, hunter-gatherer. So the majority of our day was waking up before dawn and going hunting, and then spending that time bringing the carcass back to cook, with very little time left to procreate and tell a story before a few hours of sleep and doing the next thing every day. So what civilization brought us was leisure time, luxury, the luxury of going to school, the luxury of being able to sit here and be interviewed by you, the luxury of sitting, going out to dinner, going to a movie, or blowing somebody up. You know, starting a war, you know, for property, right? That's what it is. It's real estate. War is real estate. And real estate is the biggest investment right now, that and water. So, inevitable. And so these are the things that we are greedy for, and we want them all before we die. And that's the problem. We're talking about an average lifespan of 75 years, right? So you want to do all that time, and then selfishly reap the benefits of that and leave nothing for the future. So you disregard every other life form. And you're right, nature has always been a part of us, but we defy it. We defy our instincts. Instincts are good. But there's been this divide, this belief that because I'm civilized now, because I have an intellect, I don't need instincts anymore. Or because I have complex emotions, I don't need instincts anymore. And so things exist the best with a sense of balance. And that's not balance.
True. We don't use the intellect or wisdom to be in touch with the instinct. We are disregarding instinct completely in favor of external messages of consumption, if I may say so.
Yes.
Consumption and grief. Lovely. This is, you know, I like to say we are living in the century of the self. The century of the self.
Right. That's right.
Maybe. Oh, wow. Okay. So, in this poem which you read, the recent one, you used simple sentences because there's a child speaking to the uncle. Is this your style in general? Do you like to write in a?
I'm a fan of this, what Hemingway, well, of course, actually Gertrude Stein, one of his mentors, taught him. He said
came to my mind, Hemingway.
Yeah, she taught him that the best way to write is with a simple declarative sentence. Some poetry I do write involves these simple declarative sentences. That first poem I wrote that Steve published in The Gathering of Tribes was very short, very simple, and it was about a bomb exploding and killing children in Sana'a, Yemen. And so it was called Sana'a Sunrise. And very simple, even more simple than this. But other poems, some of my other nature poems that don't deal with global warming, they're just celebrating the environment, or celebrating a walk, celebrating a garden. The language is more complex. At the same time, when I use a certain word or a certain phrase to describe an image or to suggest an image, and the wording might be somewhat complex, it's still relatively simple. So I try to tread that line of complexity and simplicity, but not being complicated.
Not being complicated.
Yeah, is to me not my style. I can be complex, but simple in that complexity.
So you're not a true postmodernist.
I flirt with it sometimes, but sometimes I feel like it's silly. So,
okay.
I know a couple of my friends would agree. So yeah.
I'll let Mr. Derrida know about that. Simplicity. You know, before I ask you about simplicity and Robert Frost, a poet I also admire. I want to know, you said you listen to music when you are in the car on the way to Georgia. I'd like to know, what music do you listen to?
Multiple genres. If it's classical, my favorite is Beethoven. If
I knew you listened to classical. That's the reason I asked you this question. Something told me that you are you listen to Western classical music, as we call it here, Western classical music, to differentiate from our own Indian classical music. And you mentioned Beethoven. So my instinct, you said some time back, listen to your instincts. That's what I did. My instinct told me that our professor listens to Western classical music, and I want to know. There's something interesting about music. We have Xerox machines. We have the photocopy machines. We have modern technology. Yet, when it comes to classical music, we rely on the classical and the post-classical period of Chopin and Beethoven, Mozart. They are still famous, and many of us don't even know don't celebrate as much our modern composers, Western composers, despite the technology. Does it strike you? Does it ever strike you? Because music is being made. Every country makes music. Almost every country has some form of folk music or tribal music or sophisticated modern music. Yet, when it comes to Western classical music, we don't know the names of our modern composers. We're not listening to them as much. Does it strike you?
It does. Of course, there's that the flirtation, I think, with or not even a flirtation, just an entire movement towards that sort of atonal sound that we get in the middle of the 20th century with Stravinsky and others. That was also being paralleled in jazz, which I also listen to, the blues and jazz. And sometimes that reminds me of early what's called classical music, but in reality it was called medieval and Renaissance music, and much more minimalistic.
Your voice is, I'm losing your clarity in the voice for some reason.
Let's try this. Is that better?
I believe it's not the distance, maybe it's the internet connection.
Okay. How's that?
Okay, this sounds better. Yeah.
So sometimes when I listen to jazz, I also listen to Renaissance and medieval music, because you're dealing with the same number of instruments, minimalistic, lots of improvisation, and you're dealing with instruments that were made from very natural material. That's the reason why today there's a big push towards a period orchestras, period instruments, to make them the way they were made back then. And I find that fascinating. And so I listen to a lot of that. But I also listen to 80s rock and British bands. And I also listen to tribal music and authentic music from different places. So one of my favorite albums is George Harrison playing with Ravi Shankar, in the late 60s and 70s.
Say that again. We lost connection.
One of my favorite albums is when George Harrison played with Ravi Shankar.
Ah, okay.
So
George Harrison and Ravi.
I have that on vinyl, and I listen to that quite a bit. So.
Oh, that must be tremendous quality. The quality must be so much better than the CD quality. Lovely. I hope the internet connection is good so we can continue, because going back to poetry, I'd like to do Robert Frost. I found a mention on your Instagram page, and some of us like Robert Frost only for a few poems of his. We don't know, but what's your? Do you like Robert Frost as a poet?
I do, and he wrote on impulse, and so he would write when he would be inspired. He would write till he stopped. And I'm an impulsive writer as well. I'll get inspired, I'll sit down, I'll write a poem, and I'll write it all the way through in 30 to 45 minutes. And then I'll take time out and then go back over it and edit it myself. But what I liked about Frost is that he would get inspired by the simplest things. He could get inspired by a tree limb or a leaf, a boy chopping wood, and then, but it's more than that. A boy sawing wood with an electric saw becomes a Shakespearean reference, an out, which is, of course, the reference to out, breathe candle from Shakespeare. So it's it cuts off his own arm, right, in the poem. and dies.
Okay.
But then you have a poem in which a boy is celebrating a tree by climbing it, in birches, So it's these types of things, his love of nature, his ability to write on simple things inspires me. And there was a call for poetry inspired by Robert Frost. And so I wrote a poem, and it didn't win the contest, but it got published in the book. So I wrote a poem about a tree in my neighborhood.
Wow. You have that with you. That will be, in case you have that poem.
Yeah, I do have it. It's
maybe?
Yeah, let's see. It's right here.
You mentioned it. While you're searching, you mentioned the tree. The one I like is The Wind and Window Flower, or Flower, by Robert Frost from A Boy's Will.
Yeah.
It's not only romantic; it's also painful if you read within, But the flower leaned aside and thought of naught to say, and morning found the breeze 100 miles away. The reason I mention this poem especially is because it connects with Noontime Caress. The images that you get in the mind. But have you got the poem? The other one, we can take that into consideration. Wonderful.
No, I think that's a great connection. You made an excellent point. It's occasionally you just get these little words and phrases of his. I mean, even the beginning of his famous poem, "Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening," that at least here in the United States is the one they teach in middle school or high school. And you got, "Whose woods these are, I think I know." I mean, it's just a great line. It's got a lot of sound and sense to it. And when I teach poetry, and I teach about sound and sense, there's this great book.
Okay.
It's very old, and it had poetry and stories in it, and questions after it. My dad would force me to read it and then answer the questions when I was younger, and I'd read out loud.
Okay.
And so it seemed torturous back then, but the title of the book was Sound and Sense, and it stuck with me, and so I believe that poetry should have sound and sense. So I wrote this poem called Popular Poplar. So the tree's a poplar, and I was playing with the sound of the word poplar with the word popular. So, popular. So popular poplar. In the neighbor's yard it stood, proud and popular. A poplar of old make that took children into its bone-colored arms and carried them to heights with lime-green hands. It was here that play accented the tree, giving birth to new branch recruits, and limbs sprouted more than enough children to bend a now tired arm toward trunk and root. Giant arthritic fingers crested the dirt at its base, giving trips to stumbling youths who would climb the smooth, thick spine. A ponytail or two might be tugged for balance, if tight-roping single file, as cracks and shuffles echoed at summer dusks. These were days for the preponderant poplar, celebrated in the annals of a child's forgotten dreams. Scions of the aged who first saluted the tree when it was still green, on the inside, would hang like bats from stalactites, their feet pretzeled around knotted bows, flapping jellied arms, hissing and screeching. Today it stands in autumnal glory, too slick to climb and too old to carry. The tired tree waits to fall and crumble.
Oh. I lost a few lines because of perhaps the internet issue, but again, there's a sense of time passing in the poem. Time passes. Is that one of the subtexts?
It is. I mean, the tree's about to die by the end. So, in its heyday, when it was strong and when we were younger, we would climb it and enjoy it and play on it and gather around it. And so both organisms are aging, the human and the tree. And it's like anything else, you know, that you celebrate or that you look up to, that's a source of wisdom and pleasure. That will die. There is no permanence. But there is permanence in impermanence. So that's the paradox, is that so a new one will grow in its place, hopefully, and or at least near it, and the process will begin all over again. So there's the permanence, the fact that things change, and it's a new tree. So
true. Perhaps trees are also forgotten today. You know, perhaps, and when we grow up, we also outgrow the tree.
Mm-hmm.
We
That's
move
right.
on. We move into cemented forests.
That's exactly, yeah.
and cubicles of glory.
I think there's a movie, right? That movie, I think, what was it, Asphalt Jungle or something? You know, the old movie. It's but it describes the, you know, what a city can do to the environment. Not all. I think there are many cities today that are trying to coexist with nature and do so in a good way, having the green spots, you know, and being conscious of that, and they're quite lovely. The city itself, the metropolis, can be lovely, but to have an entire planet as a metropolis will probably spell doom, obviously. But
absolutely. And talking about bloom, your poem which you read reminds me of Loveliest of Trees, The Cherry Now, by A. I don't know how you pronounce it, Housman, Housman.
Yeah,
Housman, okay. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now, is hung with bloom along the bough, and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. And the last four lines are the concluding stanza. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room. About the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow. Is this also your opinion that to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room? Now, of course, you have not seen 50 springs. It's quite evident you must be around 25, 30. But if you can imagine, what happened?
No,
am I 20?
No, I'm almost 50. I'm almost 50. So
yeah, okay.
I'm 48. So, but
okay.
Almost there, almost to 50 springs. So, thanks for the compliment. But yeah,
a genuine compliment.
I have not read that poem since I was an undergraduate English major, so I remember that poem. It's been a long time, but the one thing about that poem, I'm so glad you mentioned it. There's nothing like seeing a cherry tree in the springtime, you know. And my mother's yard is littered with cherry trees in the best possible way. And so in spring, it literally looks like it's snowing when the wind blows. So house is correct. These blossoms, they have the faint glow of pink. But when they're blowing in the wind, it almost looks like giant snowflakes, you know, or that the tree is even covered with snow. So. And of course, we know how that tree figures in Japanese culture as well. You know, it's we see it in almost every illustration or painting. You know, lots of also artistic photographs of the cherry trees. So.
True, and they have a festival around it, I believe, in springtime in Japan. Japan is beautiful. I've seen it in photographs. So I was connecting the cherry poem. Here's something interesting. The poet, perhaps at this time, had not actually seen the cherry tree in bloom. He had seen the cherry tree, but not in bloom. So he wrote out of his imagination. That's something that also connects with what you mentioned about the linearity of time.
Yeah,
if that's the correct word. So he drew from imagination, Mr. Hausman or Husman, and he drew from imagination and desire. He combined them, and he wrote many poems in the book A Shropshire Lad. Just something I thought I'll mention, that maybe this also you'll find interesting when you.
That's exactly an excellent point, because I think if we give our readers too much at the same time, we do them a disservice. So I think if we can conjure an image in their minds when they're reading, they will have an affinity for the subject matter even more. They'll be able to empathize, become empathetic readers, and use their own experience, their own imagination to make parallels and connections, or to be inspired themselves. And so the image then becomes a relative experience within the mind of the reader.
Absolutely. And that's how perhaps poetry connects generations. We learn and we continue from what happened before us through the words and the images, as you mentioned, that we are granted, that we are given. This question, Akshay? Okay. We'll move on to one more poem, perhaps a final one.
Sure.
Yes. Of your choice.
You want me to pick it? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's see. Hold on. All right, I'm going to just read The Last Sky, the one I wrote, the longer one I wrote for you guys that you have in the book. This was a fun poem. It was serious, but a lot of fun to write, because there's no real time. The guy's just sort of laying on his back and floating along, and he's thinking about the time of the dinosaurs and the cataclysm, the environmental cataclysm that occurred, and the one that he believes is inevitable for his generation. And so, he's staring up at the sky, so I just called it The Last Sky, because this is what the horizon for him looks like. So, The last sky. Stretched before me a fractured horizon of red, orange, and billowy black, as if a volcano cracked the ether with apocalyptic eruption. My palm cradles my head, and I float on paths of lilies, peering at the coming extinction through the fingers of my other hand. I imagine the dinosaur's last sky on a cruise through this python's curve of a lazy river. To thumb a tooth from a long extinct lizard of terrible proportion. To feel the pricking point of its legacy. Blood from my bitten lip reminds me that there was none when monsters turned to ash. O mighty asteroid, hurling gallstone from space, where is your chance encounter now? Do you know where I live? Do you know that I left my home to wander the last days of my species? I am here, beckoning, waiting for your deliverance. Scores have built temples to you through their artifice, through their industry. They have summoned you, made you anew in their image. Yet I search for the source, the universe's fastball to strike at the throat of all those who can't swallow. A tilt in our turn could mean the end. But no matter, all is as it will be. I forge a spectacle of bereavement to caress my darkened cheek as I give you, my destroyer, the other to strike.
Okay. Is this an actual asteroid, or is asteroid a symbol of perhaps the Almighty, or I don't know. What do you say?
Well, of course, there's the allusion to at least the theory that the great asteroid destroyed the dinosaurs. But the asteroid here is one of our own making. and it's inevitable. It's going to hit. There's nothing we can do about it. Or is there? Or, can we do something about it? This guy's the narrator has his own personality. He's resigned to his fate. He's resigned to his fate.
Yeah,
he's not very hopeful. And so this cheek has already been struck by the reality of what's going to happen. So he's turning the other one for finality. He's ready to just take it.
I got that. The Christian element, it reminded me of the other cheek.
Right. And but there's no religion here to help with any hope.
I agree. It's just a connecting factor.
Exactly. Yeah. I occasionally use religious imagery in my poetry because it has its mythology or its faith, depending upon the reader. I think much of the mantras and the scriptures, the basic theology, we can find similarities among all the religions. And there is this sense of apocalyptic inevitability. But if we understand what an apocalypse means, it's not necessarily complete doom. It means, it's Greek, and it basically means a new beginning after the darkness. What happens next?
True, regeneration.
Yeah, and so we can either look at it as a true apocalypse, or we can look at it as the end. So this guy, I think, he's a nihilist. He's ready for it to end, and he's got a very good sense of humor about it. He's not upset. He's just ready to die, and he's ready for everybody else to awaken to that reality. So I think, again, my duty, I think, as a poet is not just to give voice to what I feel, like I said earlier, but what others feel. And so while I'm not as nihilistic as he is, or she is, then, I'm giving voice to those people who are just fed up with the destruction, the self-destruction of others, that they're ready to die.
That's a lovely niche. You'll have a big audience of people who are turning perhaps nihilistic or, as you mentioned. So, I hope that your poetry reaches through to them, and like how the dinosaur person used humor, perhaps they too can imbibe some humor as they struggle to lead a meaningful existence. I'm genuinely having fun. Fun is a mild word, but I don't have any other word right now. No synonyms. So I'm having fun talking to you. It's very interesting. Perhaps we can, if you're up for it, we can have one more discussion, because there's so many strands that one can discuss, and I also find a lot of enthusiasm among the listeners. Some of them have been with us throughout, right from the time when I introduced myself and asked you if I am pronouncing your name in a correct manner. Right from that dinosaur era to the modern age, we have had people with us. So perhaps we can schedule again, and it will be lovely. I genuinely, and I look forward to reading more of your work. If not on Instagram, then perhaps apart from this book, Global Warming, Poet's Choice and Akshay, perhaps through other works of yours?
I just ordered the book today. I felt I've been late. I have no short-term memory, and so I'm constantly writing notes. I have probably a notebook this big of things that I forget to do. And so I guess I told myself, better late than never. So it should be here soon. And that way I can put it on my shelf. I always feel weird though, like, it's like I could never imagine teaching my poetry. My students say, "Well, you ever going to do it?" I said, "No, that's not my style." So it feels a little weird to actually order something that I got. But I want to read the other poets in that book, and I want to see what they have to offer, and I want to be inspired by them, and I want to enjoy their work. And so that was my main reason for ordering it. And not to mention all the good work that you guys do at Poet's Choice. It's I actually just recently submitted a work of creative nonfiction to you guys as well. So I think it was the Children's Memory.
Children's Memories.
Yeah. So
childhood memories.
I keep up with a lot of your work, and it's fascinating, inspiring, and very talented. So.
I'll pass on the compliment to Akshay. He's the, as we say here, karta dharta. That is he's the doer of Poet's Choice. I am his friend. I support him, and I'm his friend, and I lead the discussions. But Akshay has been working very hard on the anthologies, and he has genuine love for the publishing industry, apart from a genuine love for poetry. And you must listen to what Mr. Khalil said. Okay, after our meeting is over, lovely words, and hopefully, Akshay, we can catch up again with him. There's so much to discuss. It will be unfair if we don't listen to more about him and about his work. It'll be lovely. Also, I have here written. Is it fine to publish this a conversation on Instagram and YouTube?
Absolutely.
Mr. Khalil? Absolutely no issue. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Wonderful.
I just want you to know it was my honor to be interviewed by you. You've been respectful and kind and insightful. Your questions were amazing. You guys are incredible. You guys are incredible.
Thank you. I perhaps, if it's possible, I look forward to attending one of your lectures. It'll be great. I'll be a very avid listener. With that, I'll thank you genuinely.
And thanks to Akshay as well. So.
Yes. Thanks to Akshay as well. And I look forward to being in touch with you and reading your work. More importantly. And perhaps the next time you can introduce me to your very dear friend, the bear, the one who loves to chase you. And
hopefully it won't chase you.
Hopefully. If it does, I'm going to read the dinosaur poem, so it gets a little affected by the asteroid and the fear of the asteroid.
Exactly.
We'll be doing that. Just for clarification, my name is Kartikey. I'll mention my handle here. Any of the listeners has any idea, that you have any idea about about other sessions we can have, other discussions we can have, including with Mr. Khalil, you can let me know here. It's in landscape mode. Have I got it right? skanda.skanda. I think I've got it right. So thank you so much, Mr. Khalil, and thank you so much, listeners. I had a good time, and I'll now finish my coffee, and I look out of my window. If there are no bears, I'll head home. Lovely speaking with you.
Thank
you
so much.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night. Bye.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. I believe Tanvi is there, Tanvi Naik and others, and you have Kevin and Mr. Buraj, forgive my pronunciation. We have Shara Troutner, we have Michael, and where did the list go? It's right here. We have Shruti. Hi Shruti, thanks for joining again. We have Michael and Emily, I believe she's joining again, Emma, Sarah, and Nikki. Thank you so much. Thanks for staying through the program. And as somebody who joined in, welcome Deepshika. We have just concluded. Do watch the recording on the IGTV platform and on YouTube, Poet's Choice. I'm Kartikey, that's skanda.skanda on Instagram. If you have any ideas for further sessions we can do, let me know. Good night. Bye.